Alright, we are jumping back in at chapter 4, and you hopefully remember that Louis was Olympic bound when we ended chapter 3. This chapter is called Plundering Germany. It starts on page 29, and this is going to be the Berlin Olympics that Louis is headed for. Please make sure you follow along with me as I read. Here we go. The luxury steamer Manhattan, bearing the 1936 U.S. Olympic team to Germany, was barely past the Statue of Liberty before Louis began stealing things. In his defense, he wasn't the one who started it. Mindful of being a teenage upstart in the company of such seasoned track deities as Jesse Owens and Glenn Cunningham, Louis curbed his coltish impulses like a young horse and began growing a mustache. But he soon noticed that practically everyone on board was souvenir collecting, pocketing towels, ashtrays, and anything else they could easily lift. They had nothing on me, he said later. I was Phi Beta Kappa in taking things. The mustache was abandoned. As the voyage went on, Louis and the other light fingers quietly denuded the Manhattan. So remember that they don't have like commercial planes that they can just take across the ocean, so that all of the Olympic athletes from the U.S. are traveling to Germany on one big boat. And so the boat's really fancy, and they are stealing things. That's what's going on. Everyone was fighting for training space. Gymnasts set up their apparatuses, but with the ship swaying, they kept getting bucked off. Basketball players did passing drills on deck, but the wind kept jettisoning or shooting the balls into the Atlantic. Fencers, sword fighters, lurched all over the ship. The water athletes discovered that the salt water in the ship's tiny pool sloshed back and forth vehemently, 2 feet deep one moment, 7 feet the next, creating waves so large one water polo man took up body surfing. Every large roll heaved most of the water, and everyone in it onto the deck, so the coaches had to tie the swimmers to the wall. The situation was hardly better for runners. Louis found that the only way to train was to circle the first-class deck, weaving among deck chairs reclining movie stars and other athletes. In high seas, runners were buffeted about, all staggering in one direction and then all in the other. Louis had to move so slowly that he couldn't lose the marathon walker creeping up along beside him. And up here, you see Louis' card for the Olympic Games. So just make sure you take a look at that. For a Depression-era teenager accustomed to breakfasting on stale bread and milk, and who had eaten in a restaurant only twice in his life, the Manhattan was paradise. Upon rising, the athletes sipped cocoa and grazed from plates of pastries. At 9, there was a steak and eggs in the dining room. A coffee break, lunch, tea, and dinner followed nose to tail. Between meals, a ring for the porter would bring anything the heart desired, and late at night, the athletes raided the galley or the kitchen. Inching around the first-class deck, Louis found a little window in which pints of beer kept magically appearing. He made them magically disappear. If you've ever been on a cruise, you know that one of the things they're known for is all-you-can-eat food all the time. And so to Louis, who's never grown up around having, like, excess, right? They were poor. It was the Great Depression. This is just blowing his mind. When seasickness thinned the ranks of the diners, extra desserts were laid out, and Louis, who had sturdy sea legs, let nothing go to waste. His consumption became legendary. Recalling how the ship had to make an unscheduled stop to restock the pantries, runner James Laval joked, of course, most of this was due to Lou Zamperini. Louis made a habit of sitting next to the mountainous shot putter Jack Torrance, who had an inexplicably tiny appetite. When Torrance couldn't finish his entree, Louis dropped onto the plate like a vulture. On the evening of July 17th, Louis returned from dinner so impressed with his eating that he immortalized it on the back of the letter. Okay, this is insane. In one meal, Louis ate 1 pint of pineapple juice, 2 bowls of beef broth, 2 sardine salads, 5 rolls, 2 glasses of milk, 4 small sweet pickles, 2 plates of chicken, 2 helpings of sweet potatoes, 4 pieces of butter, 3 helpings of ice cream with wafers, 3 chunks of angel food cake with white frosting, 1.5 pounds of cherries, 1 apple, 1 orange, and 1 glass of ice water. I would burst. Biggest meal I ever ate in my life, he wrote. And I can't believe it myself, but I was there. Where it all went, I don't know. He'd soon find out. Shortly before the athletes came ashore at Hamburg, Germany, a doctor noted that quite a few were expanding. One javelin competitor had gained 8 pounds in 5 days. Several wrestlers, boxers, and weightlifters had eaten themselves out of their weight classes, and some were unable to compete. Don Lash had gained 10 pounds. Louis outdid them all, regaining all the weight he'd lost in New York and then some. When he got off to Manhattan, he weighed 12 pounds more than when he'd gotten on 9 days earlier. That is impressive, Louis. On July 24th, the athletes shuffled from ship to a train, stopped over in Frankfurt for a welcoming dinner, and reboarded the train, toting quite a few of their host's priceless wine glasses. The Germans chased down the train, searched the baggage, repatriated the glasses, which means got them back, and sent the Americans on to Berlin. There, the train was swamped by teenagers holding scissors and chanting, "Woe is the Jesse! Woe is Jesse!" When Owens stepped out, the throng swarmed him and began snipping off bits of his clothing. Owens leapt back onto the train. Which, here is a picture of Jesse Owens. Disney made a movie about him a while ago, but he ends up winning 4 gold medals during the Berlin Olympics. Remember, Berlin's in Germany. Hitler's coming, having his rise to power right now. And so as Hitler is talking about how white people are the Aryan people are the best race, here comes Jesse Owens winning all of the gold medals. This was a huge deal. Really, really exciting, and Americans were really, really proud of him. So, Jesse Owens, there you go. Continuing. The athletes were driven to the Olympic Village, a masterpiece of design crafted by Wolfgang Fürstner, a Wehrmacht captain. Nestled in an undulating patchwork of beech forests, lakes, and clearings were 140 cottages, a shopping mall, a barber shop, a post office, a dentist office, a sauna, a hospital, training facilities, and dining halls. So it created all of this to look really nice, all for the Olympics. A new technology called television was on exhibit in the village office. There were wooded trails over which bounded a multitude of imported animals. The Japanese athletes were especially taken with the deer and began feeding them treats in such volume that the Germans discreetly moved the deer out. One British wag wondered aloud where the storks were. The next day, 200 storks appeared. Louis was housed in a cottage with several other athletes, including Owens. The great sprinter kept a fatherly eye on him. Louis repaid him by swiping his Do Not Disturb sign, leaving poor Owens besieged by autograph seekers. Louis swam in the lakes, ate appalling quantities of food, and socialized. So Louis was just having a great time. The hit of the village was the Japanese contingent, whose tradition of prodigious gift-giving, or great gift-giving, made them the collective Santa Claus of the game. So the Japanese people are giving everyone gifts, and they love it. On the 1st of August, Louis and the other Olympians were driven through Berlin for the opening ceremonies. Every vista suggested coiled night. Nazi banners had been papered over everything. As much as a third of the male population was in uniform, as were many children. So in 1936, remember, World War II hasn't started yet, but we know that the Holocaust begins in 1933. You're starting to get all sorts of anti-Jewish legislation as Hitler's in power. Military units drilled openly, and though powered aircraft were forbidden under the Versailles Treaty, the strength of the burgeoning Luftwaffe was on conspicuous display over an airfield where gliders swooped over impressed tourists and Hitler youth. So Germany's basically trying to show off their power. The buses had machine gun mounts on the roofs and undercarriages that could be converted into tank-style tracks. The city was pristine, or perfectly clean. Even the wagon horses left no mark, their droppings instantly scooped up by uniformed street sweepers. Berlin's gypsies and Jewish students had vanished. The gypsies, which remember we know are called the Sinti and the Roma people, we don't call them gypsies, that's a derogatory term, but they were called gypsies then, had been dumped in camps, the Jews confined to the University of Berlin campus. So they're not sent to concentration camps at this time, but we're starting to see the ghettos be created, leaving only smiling Aryans, or white people. The only visible wisp of discard was the broken glass in the windows of Jewish businesses, which hopefully you remember we've talked about Kristallnacht, the night of broken glass, when all of those windows would have been broken. The buses drove to the Olympic Stadium. Entering in a parade of nations and standing at attention, the athletes were treated to a thunderous show that culminated in the release of 20,000 doves. As the birds circled in panic confusion, cannons began firing, prompting the birds to relieve themselves over the athletes, meaning the birds get scared and they poop all over everyone. With each report, the birds let fly. Louis stayed at attention, shaking with laughter. Louis had progressed enough in 4 5,000-meter races to compete with Lash, but he knew that he had no chance of winning an Olympic medal. It wasn't just that he was out of shape from the long idleness on the ship, and almost pudgy from gorging on board and in the village. Few nations had dominated an Olympic event as Finland had the 5,000, winning gold in 1912, 24, 28, and 32. Lauri Lehtinen, who had won gold in 32, was back for another go, along with his brilliant teammates, Gunnar Hockert and Ilmari Salminen. When Louis watched them train, noted a reporter, his eyes bulged. Louis was too young and too green to beat the Finns, and he knew it. His day would come, he believed, in the 1500, 4 years later. In the last days before his preliminary heat, Louis went to the stadium and watched Owens crush the field in the 100 meters and Cunningham break the world record for the 1500, but still lose to New Zealander Jack Lovelock. The atmosphere was surreal. Each time Hitler entered, the crowd jumped up with the Nazi salute. With each foreign athlete's victory, an abbreviated version of his or her national anthem was played. But when a German athlete won, the stadium rang with every stanza of Deutschland über alles, and the spectators shouted, Sag Heil, endlessly, arms outstretched. According to the swimmer Iris Cummings, the Slavish nationalism was a joke to the Americans, but not to the Germans. If you ever get curious, go and just look at some pictures from the 1936 Berlin Olympics. It's kind of creepy when we know that World War II was right around the corner. And that's what they're talking about, that the Germans were taking this very seriously. The Gestapo, who are like our police, paced the stadium, eyeing the fans. A German woman sitting with Cummings refused to salute. She shrank between Iris and her mother, whispering, Don't let them see me. Don't let them see me. So we already have a lot of foreshadowing for the war ahead as we see this fear that people have. On August 4th, 3 5,000-meter qualifying heats were run. Louis drew the third deepest heats, facing Lehtinen. The top 5 in each heat would make the final. In the first, Lash ran third. In the second, Tom Decker, the other American, failed to qualify. Louis slogged through Heat 3, feeling fat and leaden-legged. He barely caught 5th place at the line. He wrote in his diary, tired as hell. He had had 3 days to prepare for the final. While he was waiting, an envelope arrived from Pete. Inside were 2 playing cards, an ace and a joker. On the joker, Pete had written, Which are you going to be? The joker, which is another word for horse's ass, or the tops, ace of spades, the best in the bunch, the highest in the deck. Take your choice. On the ace he had written, Let's see you storm through as the best in the deck. If the joker does not appeal to you, throw it away and keep this for good luck. Pete. On August 7th, Louis lay face down in the infield of the Olympic Stadium, readying himself for the 5,000-meter final. 100,000 spectators ringed the track. Louis was terrified. He pressed his face to the grass, inhaling deeply, trying to settle his quivering nerves. When the time came, he rose, walked to the starting line, bowed forward, and waited. His paper number, 751, flapped against his chest. At the sound of the gun, Louis's body, electric with nervous energy, wanted to bolt, but Louis made a conscious effort to relax, knowing how far he had to go. As the runner surged forward, he kept his stride short, letting the pace setters untangle. Lash emerged with the lead, a troika of Finns just behind him. Louis floated left and settled into the second tier of runners. The laps wound by. Lash kept leading, the Finns on his heels. Louis pushed along in the second group. He began breathing in a sickening odor. He looked around and realized it was coming from a runner ahead of him, his hair a slick of reeking pomade. That's like hair gel that was just super thick and smelled. Feeling a swell of nausea, Louis slowed and slid out of it, and the stench Finns were slipping out of reach, and Louis wanted to go with them, but his body felt sodden. As the clumps of men stretched and thinned into a long broken thread, Louis sank through the field to 12. Only 3 stragglers trailed him. Ahead, the Finns scuffed and sidled into Lash, roughing him up. Lash held his ground, but on the 8th lap, Salminen cocked his elbow and rammed it into Lash's chest. Lash folded abruptly in evident pain. The Finns bounded away. They entered the 11th lap in a tight knot, looking to sweep the medals. Then, for an instant, they strayed too close to each other. Salminen's leg clipped out of Hockert. As Hockert stumbled, Salminen fell heavily to the track. He rose, dazed, and resumed running. His race, like Lash's, was lost. Louis saw none of it. He passed the deflated Lash, but it meant little to him. He was tired. The Finns were small and distant, much too far away to catch. He found himself thinking of Pete and of something that he had said as they had sat on their bed years earlier. A lifetime of glory is worth a moment of pain. Louis thought, let go. And here you see, it says that Louis is number 751, so he's way back here in the pack. Nearing the finish line for the penultimate time, so we're 1 lap away, Louis fixed his eyes on the gleaming head of the pomaded competitor, who was many runners ahead. He began a dramatic acceleration. Around the turn and down the backstretch, Louis kicked, his legs reaching and pushing, his cleats biting the track, his speed dazzling. One by one, runners came up ahead and faded away behind. All I had, Louis would say, I gave it. As Louis flew around the last bend, Hockert had already won. With Lightning behind him, Louis wasn't watching them. He was chasing the glossy head, still distant. He heard a gathering roar and realized that the crowd had caught sight of his rally and was shouting him on. Even Hitler, who had been contorting himself in concert with the athletes, was watching him. Louis ran on, Pete's words beating in his head, his whole body burning. The shining hair was far away, then near, that it was so close that Louis again smelled the pomade. With the last of his strength, Louis threw himself over the line. He had made up 50 yards in the last lap and beaten his personal best time by more than 8 seconds. His final time, 14:46.8, was by far the fastest 5,000 run by any American in 1936, almost 12 seconds faster than Lash's best for the year. He had just missed 7th place. As Louis bent, gasping over his spent legs, he marveled at the kick that he had forced from his body. It had felt very, very fast. 2 coaches hurried up, gaping at their stopwatches, on which they had clocked his final lap. Both watches showed precisely the same time. In distance running in the 1930s, it was exceptionally rare for a man to run a last lap in 1 minute. This rule held even in the comparatively short hop of a mile. In the 3 fastest miles ever run, the winner's final lap had been clocked at 61.2, 58.9, and 59.1 seconds, respectively. No lap in those 3 historic performances had been faster than 58.9. In the 5,000, well over 3 miles, turning a final lap in less than 70 seconds was a monumental feat. In his 1932 Olympic 5,000 victory, in which he clocked a record-breaking final time, Lettinen spun his last lap in 69.2 seconds. Louis had run his last lap in 56 seconds. So we've talked about how with running, Louis not only gets his life back on track, but finds that he has this crazy determination and ability to just keep pushing through things. And we see that again here, where even though he's losing, he can just kick it in gear and have this record-breaking final lap when he's in the Olympic race. After cleaning himself up, Louis climbed into the stands. Nearby, Adolf Hitler sat in his box among his entourage. Someone pointed out a cadaverous man near Hitler. A cadaver is a dead person that you can operate on, usually like in an anatomy class, to learn about the human body. And so cadaverous would mean he looks dead. A cadaverous man near Hitler and told Louis that it was Joseph Goebbels, Hitler's minister of propaganda, so the person who's going to make sure that false ideas about Jewish people and that negative information is communicated. Louis had never heard of him. Pulling out his camera, he carried it to Goebbels and asked if he'd snap a picture of the Führer, of Hitler. Goebbels asked him his name and event, then took the camera, moved away, snapped a photo, spoke with Hitler, returned, and told Louis that the Führer wanted to see him. Louis was led to the Führer's section. Hitler bent from his box, smiled, and offered his hand. Louis, standing below, had to reach far up. Their fingers barely touched. Hitler said something in German. An interpreter translated. Ah, you're the boy with the fast finish. Happy with his performance, Louis was itching to raise hell, right? 'Cause he's still kind of a troublemaker. He had hoped to pal around with Glenn Cunningham, but his hero proved too mature for him. Instead, he found a suitably irresponsible companion, donned his Olympic dress uniform, and descended on Berlin. The two prowled bars, wooed girls, chirped Heil Hitler at everyone in uniform, and stole anything Germanish that they could pry loose. In an automat, they discovered German beer. The serving size was a liter, which took Louis a good while to finish. Buzzing, they went walking, then circled back for another liter, which went down easier than the first. Trolling around Berlin, they stopped across the street from the Reich Chancellery. A car pulled up and out stepped Hitler, who walked inside. Studying the building, Louis spotted a small Nazi flag near the doors. It would make a swell souvenir, and it looked easy to reach. The banner didn't yet carry much symbolic meaning for him or many other Americans in the summer of '36. Louis just had a hankering to steel in his head and 2 persuasive liters of German brew in his belly. 2 guards paced the apron before the Chancellery. Watching them walk, Louis noted that on each pass there was a point at which both had their backs to the flag. As the soldiers turned, Louis ran to the flag and immediately realized that it was much higher than he had thought. He began jumping in the air, trying to catch the edge of it. He became so absorbed in his task that he forgot about the guards, who ran toward him shouting. Taking one last lunge for the flag, Louis snagged the edge and fell to the pavement, tearing the banner down with him, then scrambled to his feet and ran like mad. This is a line we've heard multiple times about Louis as he gets into trouble. He heard a crack. Behind him, the guard was running at him, his gun pointed at the sky, yelling, "Halten Sie!" That much Louis understood. He stopped. The guard grabbed his shoulder, spun him around, saw his Olympic uniform, and hesitated. He asked Louis his name. The one thing that Louis knew about Nazis was that they were anti-Semitic, meaning against Jewish people. So when he gave his name, he delivered it in an exaggeratedly Italian fashion, rolling the R, he would say, for about 2 minutes. The guards conferred, went inside, and came out with someone who looked more important than they. The new German asked him why he had stolen the flag. Louis, laying it on thick, replied that he wanted a souvenir of the happy time he had had in beautiful Germany. The Germans gave him the flag and let him go. When the press got wind of Louis's adventure, reporters took creative liberties. Louis had stormed Hitler's palace to steal the flag in a hail of gunfire that had whistled around his head. Plunging 18 feet, he had raced away, pursued by 2 columns of armed guards who had tackled him and beat him. Just as a German rifle butt had been about to crash on Louis's head, the German army's commander-in-chief had halted the attack, and Louis had talked the general into sparing his life. In one version, Hitler himself had allowed him to keep the flag. In another, Louis had concealed the flag so cleverly that it was never discovered. He had done it all, went the story, to win the heart of a girl. And this is why you should double-check things you read on the internet or in newspapers. On August 11th, Louis packed his belongings, the flag, and an array of other stolen Teutonica and left his room in the Olympic Village. The games were winding down and the track athletes were leaving early to compete in meets in England and Scotland. A few days earlier, fireworks brought the games to a booming close. Hitler's show had gone without a hitch. The world was full of praise. The American basketball player, Frank Lubin, lingered in Berlin for a few days. His German host had invited him out to dinner, so they cruised the streets in search of a restaurant. A pretty place caught Lubin's eye, but when he suggested it, his host balked. A Star of David hung in the window, which would be a sign that the owners of the place were Jewish. To be seen there, they said, might prove harmful to us. The group found a genteel restaurant, then visited a public swimming pool. As they walked in, Lubin saw a sign reading, Juden verboten. The sign hadn't been there during the games. So it said Jews are forbidden from the pool. And as soon as everyone left after the Olympics, they put back all of these signs throughout Germany. All over Berlin, such signs were reappearing. And the Nazis' virulently anti-Semitic Der Stürmer, nowhere to be seen during the games, was back on newsstands. Lubin had won a gold medal in Berlin, but when he left, he felt only relief. Something terrible was coming, again with the foreshadowing of World War II and also this Olympian is figuring out, oh, this is the real situation in Germany. He's realizing how bad it is. The Olympic Village wasn't empty for long. The cottages became military barracks. With the Olympics over and his usefulness for propaganda expended, the village's designer, Captain Fürstner, learned that he was to be cashiered from the Wehrmacht because he was a Jew. He killed himself. Less than 20 miles away, in the town of Oranienburg, the first prisoners were being hauled into the Sachsenhausen concentration camp. On the evening of September 2nd, when Louis arrived in Torrance, he was plunked onto a throne on the flatbed of a truck and paraded to the depot, where 4,000 people, whipped up by a band, sirens, and factory whistles, cheered. Louis shook hands and grinned for pictures. I didn't only start too slow, he said, I ran too slow. As he settled back into home, Louis thought of what lay ahead. Pause here and note that just like we've had for the whole beginning of the book, we see these two ideas juxtaposed, that we have this really horrible war starting, and then we have Louis, and he's fun, and he's funny, and he's playful, and he gets into trouble, and he's a runner. And Louis' personality is going to kind of eventually collide with that war. Running the 1936 Olympics, the Olympic 5000 at 19 on 4 races experience had been a shot at the moon. Running the 1940 Olympic 1500 at 23 after years of training would be another matter. The same thought was circling in Pete's mind. Louis could win gold in 1940, and both brothers knew it. A few weeks before, officials had announced which city would host the 1940 Games. Louis shaped his dreams around Tokyo, Japan. And Japan and Louis are going to have lots of run-ins in the future. So on that note, we're going to pause. We will get to chapter 5 next time. And that's all, folks.